BCIT is located on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples who have been stewards of this land for millennia. And we're extremely grateful as well for their support and knowledge sharing on this project. The webinar will be no more than 2 hours long, which includes approximately 35 to 45 minutes for audience questions. That's really the gist of this webinar. We'll start, I'll give an intro on our NRCan Fueling Change project. Will be followed by Clay Howie from one of my colleagues from the Smart Microgrid Applied Research team on the work that we've been doing on EV charging infrastructure. That will be followed by our amazing consultant on accessible charging and policy work, Jacques Courteau, followed by Doug Beckett, a EV driver and part co-chair for the Prince George Electric Vehicle Association in Northern BC, and his colleague, Mark Vivoda. Both of them have all kinds of EV driving experience in cold weather and more rural areas. And we'll follow that with an audience Q&A with the panelists. Again, please post your questions to the Q&A section, not the chat. And whenever the question strikes you, go ahead and post them. So this webinar is funded under the Fueling Change project, which is a zero emission vehicle initiative funded partially by NRCan. And we are also supported by Vancouver Electric Vehicle Association and Flow Chargers, along with Mohawk College and Canadian Colleges for Resilient Recovery, or C2R2. Most of us know the government requires that for the 2026 year, 20% of all new light duty vehicles sold will be electric. This increases to 60% by 2030, just 6 years from now, and 100% by 2035. Urban and metropolitan areas, particularly those along the Trans-Canada Highway Corridor and the border area, are well able to provide infrastructure services and training that help to support higher EV uptake. However, one of the things that we've observed over the course of our research projects is that some communities are underrepresented in the transition to EVs, and they lack access to this kind of support and infrastructure. So this project is aimed at some of these communities. For the purpose of the project, these include youth, seniors, Indigenous communities, persons with flexibility and mobility disabilities, and with particular emphasis on Canada's northern and rural communities. The objectives of the Fueling Change project are to consult with members of these communities, to combine the feedback we receive to develop free online courses. The project is also hosting community learning events as outreach, as well as inreach, to provide additional feedback for ongoing updates to the courses. And I'll speak a little bit more to each of these on the next slides. The main thrust of, or the initial portion of the survey, of the consultations, was an online survey. But before we get to this, I wanted to just do a quick, this is a good spot to stop, to do a quick Zoom poll. I just wanted to get a bit of a finger on the pulse of where our attendees are located in Canada. So if we can just have a response, give you a couple minutes to respond to this poll. You see the results? Numbers. Okay, so can we just share those results with the attendees? Okay, great. So we do have a little bit of a spread. That's good to see. And welcome to those attending from Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario. So our initial consultation started with an online survey. The thrust of the survey, the survey was live through a couple of weeks in July. It received about 650 responses, and the goal of the survey was to better understand where the public stands with respect to feelings and knowledge about EVs, and where the main challenges seem to be with EV adoption. So, as I mentioned, the survey ran for about 3 weeks, about 650 responses. I won't get into results, but I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. During the analysis of the survey results and the design meetings, some common threads emerged, and we arrived at 4 1-credit online courses that were built around these themes. So concerns that EVs have higher socio-environmental impact, winter driving concerns, cost concerns. Those concerns listed on the slide here were the ones that kind of burbled to the surface of the survey results. The first course, 0390, the courses can actually be taken in individually and in any order. Successful completion of the course results in a BCIT badge, sort of a certificate style badge that can be downloaded. 0390 is what we call the first course. It's foundational and it provides basic knowledge assumed in the other 3 courses. So it covers basic information about purchasing, what it's like to drive and own an EV. It addresses feedback about limited availability of information on these basics in the regions that we surveyed. It may be of particular interests to auto sales people, people working in the auto sales industry. Feedback from responders who are EV owners indicated that dealers often aren't able to provide the type of orientation about these things that are new to EV drivers. (0391) is a little bit more technical. EV charging infrastructure. It's still suitable for anyone, and perhaps of particular interest to electricians thinking about or upskilling, or to EV infrastructure planners who are designing EV parking charging areas. This course is aimed at addressing concerns by responders about different types of chargers, implications for their local electrical grid, and potential for increased outages, and how and why EVs are data networked, how and why EV energy management systems are used, and considerations for fully accessible charging and parking solutions, including universal design principles to support EV charging for everyone. 0392 EV Industries is also a bit more technical, but again, it's still suitable for anyone, and perhaps of particular interest to people in the auto industry, automobile services industry, thinking about or upskilling. This course acknowledges concerns about the manufacturing process, discusses battery life pathways of EV batteries, and includes circular design discussion, as well as explaining the battery recycling process and discussing material recovery potential. The course also addresses concerns about loss of auto industry jobs, providing an overview of the ongoing and new opportunities for EV support industries, as well as upskilling and reskilling opportunities. 0393 is meant to provide a look at where EV and related technologies markets are heading, including faster charging, new developments in battery technology, autonomous charging, including robotics, and wireless charging. Wireless charging is also highlighted in this section as one potential emerging solution for fully accessible charging to support everyone, including persons with flexibility and mobility disabilities. We also have a look at hydrogen vehicles and those related technologies. And finally, the final component of the project is what we're all witnessing here now, and it includes community learning events. We've done a few of those as listed on the slide here. We have the potential for additional upcoming learning events to be happening over the next little while through March and possibly in through to the end of June. So I'm going to now turn things over to my colleague, Clay Howie, so that he can give his chat.
Oh. There we go. Okay, can everyone see my video and my presentation? My name is Clay Howie, and I'm a project leader at Smart Microgrid Applied Research Team and one of the team members of the Natural Resources Canada Zero Emission Vehicle Awareness Initiative that Joey has been leading for us. So I'm going to talk about, and I apologize right from the get-go because there's way too much subject matter for this topic to fit into 10 minutes, but I'll do my best to at least do a high-level summary of some of the high barriers that people experience with EV charging. So these are some of them. If you have a garage, it's a slam dunk to put in charging, but if you don't have a garage, then that's a challenge. If you have to park on the street, if you live in a condo or an apartment, or if, you're living in a building that's old with limited electrical capacity, or if you're elderly or disabled and have a hard time managing cables, those are all barriers to adoption of EVs, and we've been doing some R&D on breaking down those barriers. So some of the solutions are what I'll dive into here: electric vehicle energy management systems. We've done some pilots on curbside charging using streetlight infrastructure and MERB installations, and I'll define what a MERB is, but teaser is that it's condos and apartments, multi-unit residential buildings, and I'll touch on wireless charging. So just some notes on EV charging and the electrical grid. So there's obviously an expansion of EV charging infrastructure that's necessary to support EV adoption. And 99.9% of the built infrastructure was never designed to accommodate EV charging. So a lot of the parkades in high-rise buildings were never designed for EV charging. So the solution to providing EV charging in these challenging areas is this concept of an electric vehicle energy management system, which actively controls the amount of power drawn by a collection of EV chargers. This maximizes the utilization of electric infrastructure capacity and avoids prohibitive costs that are needed for capacity upgrades. It's just unfeasible to do a large forklift upgrade of a transformer for an existing building. The downside is that charging times can be slower because the power is being shared between a collection of EVs. But most EV charging happens overnight, and by morning, you're either going to have a full battery or you're going to have more than enough electricity to get to your destination. So curbside charging is something that we did in a previous Natural Resources Canada funded project in the city of New Westminster. That was providing curbside charging for what are called garage orphans. If you don't have a garage, if you don't have off-street parking, there's a label for it. It's garage orphans. So, so this is also convenient for neighborhoods that don't have large parking lots, and it can be very expensive to trench or tear up existing sidewalks, and there's jurisdiction issues because the city can often own that property next to the curb, not the homeowner. And so in some cases, existing streetlight electric infrastructure can be used to reduce the installation costs. And around the world, people are changing, they're updating the fixtures from sodium vapor and metal halide to very efficient LED fixtures. So that in itself can free up some capacity that can be used for charging. So the streetlights in conjunction with an EVMS makes sure that you've got enough electricity to provision the chargers. And during the daytime when the streetlights are off, it's a slam dunk. At night, you still need to actively manage how much juice is flowing to the cars. But again, by morning and overnight, you're going to have 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a full battery. So not every location is ideal. In the photo that you see in the picture, first off, it's not a great candidate for curbside charging because the houses all have garages, so they're not really a candidate for this. Plus, as you can see, the street light is on the wrong side of the sidewalk, so you'd have to have a cable lying across the sidewalk, which is a code violation in most places. But having said that, we found a number of suitable locations in the city of New Westminster, and here's one of the, a couple of the locations that were ideal for this. And more of this is covered in one of the courses that Joey talked about, the MOOC 0391. And a little bit about MURBs here. MURBs, again, multi-unit residential buildings. So if you live in a condo or an apartment, getting charging in can be problematic. You do need to get the permission of the strata. But the main challenge is that if you're the first homeowner, the strata, and you get permission from the strata, you may contact an electrician. They may put in one dedicated circuit to your charger, and that might work for the first 5 or 10 or so on, but pretty soon you're going to run up against the limitation of the electrical capacity of the building. So again, an EVMS, an energy managed solution, is what's appropriate. So we've done 3 MURBs, pilot projects, and we didn't cherry pick these. These were, the main criteria was that the strata councils that already voted in favor of having putting in the chargers. So in the first MURB, we used 6 energy managed chargers from Sun Country Highway. But the main takeaway, this parking garage has about 100 stalls, and working with an electrical engineer, we came up with a plan for 100% of the stalls. So this solution can grow organically as the number of chargers goes up. And this first installation is controlled by our own network management software. Second location, we installed 8, and we used a commercial EVMS network management software provider, Canadian firm called Switch, and they're all 8 are from Switch. In our last MURB, we used 2 different chargers, and we used another Canadian company, Charge Lab, to control those installations. But again, because they're energy managed, you don't have to worry nearly as much about running out of electrical, running out of juice. Lastly, I'll just touch on wireless charging. Wireless charging is something that's, still on the horizon. There's been some interesting pilots on it, and again, this is covered more in MOOC 0393. And one of the sort of profound things about this is we have autonomous driving cars, and now we can have autonomous fueling cars. So these cars can literally fuel themselves. So they work by a magnetic resonance field between a pad on the ground and a receiving pad on the underside of the EV. This eliminates the needs for cables and connectors, less maintenance involved. And this is a potential solution for people, elderly and people with disabilities, for whom managing the cords and navigating the bollards and curb stops is a formidable challenge. And Jacques Courtier is going to talk more about those challenges. But we do have a standard in place for this now. We should see some products hitting the market soon. We've seen some demonstrations, and this is something that can work well, apparently, even in northern communities. We were at an event back in the fall where they had done some pilots in Scandinavia, and they actually while an active wireless charging session was in place, they slid a slab of ice between, and the charge rate actually increased. Don't have any papers on that yet, but it was just anecdotal evidence, or anecdotal from some of the people who were involved in the testing. Okay, I'm done. I think we're going to save the Q&A until later part. So,
okay. So my name's Doug Beckett. I've been driving electric vehicles in Lheidli-T'enneh territory in Prince George, Central BC since 2009. And so a little bit of experience. I'll go over a 2013 Nissan Leaf I had for a while, then a 2016 Leaf, and a little perspective of cold weather. So just the context, in 2009, we started driving this pickup truck that high school mechanics class converted for us. And as you can see, it's parked outside. We're in the rural area, 5+ acre lots out here. And our charging station is a post on the driveway. This was before the standard J plug came along, so we're using an RV plug at that time. There's the 2013 Leaf. We bought it when it was 4 years old, got it in 2017. I'm a bit of a data geek, so I've monitored a lot of different data on both, all three of the electric vehicles I have. So this shows you the fuel efficiency of the 2013 Nissan Leaf. In the summertime, we're getting 7 kilometers or more per kilowatt hour, and it drops down to a little less than 5 kilometers per kilowatt hour in the wintertime. Now, because your battery is a fixed size, that's directly correlated to the range changes that you will experience with your electric vehicle as well. So we've had, at the time period we had this vehicle, we got 6.4 kilometers per kilowatt hour. So December 24th, 2019, our Leaf got rear-ended and ICBC wrote it off. We'd had it for 2 years, 7 months, drove more than 46,000 kilometers, used a little over 7,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Now, a 30 mile to the gallon gas or diesel vehicle, ICE being internal combustion engine, would have used over 4,000 liters of gas. So anybody out there know how much you pay BC Hydro for a kilowatt hour of electricity? And this isn't overly interactive, so I'm going to guess that some of you said, I don't know, and others said 10 cents if you're paying at step 1. So at 10 cents, today's currency, including taxes, that would cost about $740 to drive 46,000 kilometers. At 15 cents, your step 2 rate, you could add another $300 to that amount. So at about $1.40 a liter, current prices for gas and diesel, for a little over 4,000 liters of gas, you'd be looking at 6,000 kilometers to drive the same distance. So massive fuel savings with electric vehicles. So people complain that electric vehicles are expensive and for the rich. Well, if you get a low tech, used, low mileage or low range electric vehicle, you can actually have hands down great savings. If you're 2-vehicle family or more, one of those vehicles in most cases can be an electric. So in 2017, we paid a little over $13,000 for our 2013 Leaf. It was 4 years old at the time, and we trucked it up from Victoria to Prince George for $750 and paid some taxes. So when it got written off, ICBC gave us almost $14,000 and then taxes on top of that. So we lost about $200 depreciation to drive 46,000 kilometers over 2 years, 7 months. Not bad. So early 2020, we got another 4-year-old Leaf, this time a newer 2016 Leaf. Same sort of data. This time our range in the summer time's a little better, mid 7.5 kilometers per kilowatt hour, but the range in the winter time is lower, dropping closer to 4 kilometers per kilowatt hour. So far in the distance that we've driven, we're averaging 6.3 kilometers per kilowatt hour. Now, the difference between the 2013 and the 2016 Leaf is the 2013 Leaf had a battery warmer. So sort of like a block heater with your gas vehicles. And it keeps the battery warm in the wintertime. So I think some of the difference in fuel efficiency we see is because the 2016 Leaf does not have a battery warmer. I wish it did, because in the cold weather, I've been driving the 2016 Leaf. And by cold, I mean daily highs of -30 and colder. I've been driving my vehicle 3 times a day because it warms up the battery when you drive, warms the battery when you charge. And that way, when it's -40 in the morning, I'm able to start and have a nice drive. So in the 4 years, we've had the 2020 Nissan, or the 2016 Nissan Leaf. We've driven a little over 60,000 kilometers, used a little over 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Again, a 30 mile to the gallon gas or diesel vehicle would have used about 6,000 liters of gas for the same distance. So at 10 cents, we're looking at a little over $1,000. You're looking about $1,500 if you're paying a significant amount on step 2. And that compares to at $1.40 a liter, about $8,000 that the gas and diesel vehicles would pay for the same driving. So that newer Nissan Leaf cost us $18,000 outside of Vancouver, plus some shipping and taxes. So for interest, both of our Nissan Leafs were part of a research program. We got in on the early days with our 2013. We're part of one of 100 electric vehicles in British Columbia that was part of the research program. And then that research program expanded across Canada. So it was one of 1,000 vehicles, EVs across Canada. And I believe it's since expanded into the US, but I've removed my car for operational reasons from that research program. But a lot of good data came from that research. So before Christmas, Les Lane wrote a opinion piece for the Times Colonist newspaper that was questioning the validity and operations of electric vehicles in the north and in the cold. So if you're curious, November 11th edition of their paper, I have a rebuttal in there where I sort of said he was off base and had no experience to say what he was saying. In my response, I'm saying electric vehicles start in the cold when your gas and diesel vehicles don't. So they're more reliable in the cold. And what is really sweet is that within a minute of starting your electric vehicle, you have 30 degrees Celsius, maybe that's what, 90 degrees Fahrenheit heat coming from the electric heater blowing into the cab space for the vehicle occupants. And in your gas and diesel vehicles at -30, -40, you can wait 20, 40 minutes for somewhat warm air to be blowing from your engine into the cab space. Many who drive electric vehicles, because of this instant heat, don't use their ice scraper because the cars defrost so quickly. And you don't have to stand out there for 5 minutes or whatever holding the gas pump, filling up your vehicle. It takes about 10 seconds to plug in, and you go into a warm space, into your house, have your dinner. And it takes about 10 seconds to unplug. So you're not standing in the cold as much with electrics when you're filling. And it costs about 25 cents a liter equivalent when you're filling up at home. It's really convenient to fill at home. Misconception is that you don't have to do oil changes for EVs, and you should. You don't have to, but if you want the vehicle to last you longer, at 60,000, 100,000 kilometers, please replace your reducer fluid. It's about 1 liter. It doesn't cost much, and you're not going in every 9,000 kilometers to do this. It's once every 100,000 kilometers. So you can power your deep freeze, computer, and other stuff when there's a power outage just by plugging an extension cord into your 120-volt outlet in your electric vehicle. No need for generators and maintaining generators anymore. Very convenient. And the newer electric vehicles have the ability to do vehicle to load, vehicle to house, vehicle to grid. And if you buy the connections, yes, it's a bit of money. You can set it up that you can plug your house into your electric vehicle, and something like a Ford Lightning electric pickup truck can power a house for up to 3 days from its battery. Vehicles hands down outperform gas and diesel vehicles. The EVs, the electric vehicles do, and their electric vehicles are just fun to drive. So my experience is pretty much everybody who buys an electric vehicle will, swears they'll never go back to gas or diesel. I think I know one exception in the history of this. You brought me in because I have experience with cold weather. I'm a commute EV driver. Mark, who comes up after me, is a distance EV driver. But we have people in our groups who live in Northwest Alberta, in the Yukon, who deal with much colder weather than Mark and I deal with. And Peter, who I met a number of years ago, has a Tesla Model 3 in Northwestern Alberta. Finishes off saying, when I told him I was doing these presentations on cold weather, said, no problems. And what else can I say? I'm a bigger fan now than I was. And a few months ago, the CBC North did an interview of a gentleman who's had an electric Ford Lightning for a little while. And embedded in the article is a 6-minute video. And in the video, he talks about last winter where he was driving his Lightning when it was -48, -50 Celsius. So in the end, if you can't buy an electric vehicle now because there's not one that meets your needs, but you need another vehicle, make sure you're leasing your gas or diesel vehicle. Let somebody else end up with the stranded asset, because the transition's happening quickly. Electrics are just hands down wonderful vehicles. And I put out a newsletter with the Prince George Electric Vehicle Association, and a separate newsletter with a separate group called the Energy Transition Group, which looks at broader energy transition issues. If you're interested in one or the other or both, please email me, and feel free to subscribe. It's all free. And we'll do the questions later. Thank you.
Good morning again. I have to mention that in the same accident that put me in a wheelchair paralyzed my tongue, and it has a definite impact on my how well they can understand me. So I will try to speak more slowly and to articulate better. As I was saying previously, universal design is a design that is not made only to make gadgets and widgets accessible to persons with disabilities. It is to make it accessible to all. And as a result, it is now the preferred way of developing chargers and charging stations to make sure that everyone can use them, and not just to make special adaptations for persons with disabilities. The 7 universal design principles were developed in 1997 at the University of North Carolina, and they are still today the 7 principles that are used in every design exercise to make sure that whatever is being designed can be usable to all. The first principle of the universal design is equitable use. And equitable use meaning that the design can be used and is marketable to people with diverse abilities. In relation to this design, there were four guidelines that are provided. The first one is that you have to provide the same means of use to all the users, identical whenever possible or equivalent when not. Second, avoid segregating or stigmatizing any users. And we've seen that in some cases where some accessible design items were added to certain gadgets or charging stations or whatever, which makes them easier to use for persons with disabilities, but not for others. And there's always a kind of a pushback from the general population when they perceive that their own ability to use something has been impacted negatively because of adaptations for accessibility. The third guideline is to provide for privacy, security, and safety, which should be equally available to all users. And finally, make the design appealable or appealing to all users. So what I have on the screen here is a nice picture of a car being charged in the winter with obviously no weather protection and very limited access for somebody like me in a wheelchair who would try to get from that car to the charger to plug in my car. Not a very equitable design. Okay, sorry, technical issues. So the second principle of universal design is flexibility in use. And basically what we're talking about here is this design will work for a person with disabilities, a person without disabilities, or any other preference that the person might have, such as, for example, using the left hand or the right hand. And the guidelines attached to this are provide choices in the methods of use, accommodate right and left-handed access and use, facilitate the user's accuracy and precision, and provide adaptability to the user's pace. So in the video, in the picture I have here, you can see all the restrictions being placed on cars that were being used in the charging station. And the last one on the right says, do not back in. And unfortunately, my Tesla has a charging port that's in the back of the vehicle, and I have to back in. So obviously, this particular design does not work well for my own vehicle. The next design principle is simple and intuitive use. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what you've learned about the various items on the gadget you're about to use. It should be easy to use, no matter what your experience, your knowledge, your language skills, or your current concentration level. Interestingly, on the charger that I'm showing in the picture here, if you look on that black screen at the very bottom right, there's a kind of a small icon. And that icon I only saw after struggling a bit to get my car charged and it wouldn't work. And that icon says out of order. And I've asked other people who deal with this kind of the charger, and they said, well, obviously it's not working. The lights on the side are red. And I said, how am I supposed to know that a red light means it's not working? So this design is not particularly intuitive. The next design principle is perceptible information. Make sure that there is some feedback given to the user to make sure that he knows how to use this particular item. The guidelines are provide choice, estimate eliminate the unnecessary complexity. You know, the old KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. Be consistent with the user expectations and intuition. Accommodate a wide range of literacy Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading from the wrong slide. So, this design guidelines are use different modes for redundant presentation, whether it's using a picture, whether it's using verbal commands, whether it's tactile, make sure there's different modes available to use this particular item. Provide an adequate contrast between essential information and the surroundings. Maximize legibility. Differentiate elements in ways that can be described and provide compatibility with a variety of techniques or devices. In this particular picture, as you can see, there's a nice screen, and I'm sure that if you're standing up, you can read it. But from where I was sitting, the reflection and the glare from the sun makes it completely unreadable. So that particular screen does not work for me. Tolerance for error. This particular design principle says you should not be in a situation where making a mistake in the use of this particular device will have terminal consequences. Some of the guidelines on this provide the same means of use for all users, and basically make sure that the design can be used by all. In this case, the error is the red button on the charger is the one I have to press if there is a malfunction in the charging system. I cannot reach that button. So there is a problem here with tolerance for error. If something goes wrong, I can do nothing about it. The sixth one is low physical effort, and that is pretty obvious from the picture. You have to be able to use the particular design. We have a problem in all charging systems so far with the management of the cable, which is for fast chargers, extremely heavy and inflexible, especially in winter. And in this particular picture here, I had to use an adapter, which is very heavy, at the end of the cable. So there was a real issue with the low physical effort. And the final design principle is size and space for approach and use. Make sure that you have enough space around the device and that you can actually use it properly no matter what your posture and what your situation in terms of disability. And in this picture, there's a car parked on a charging station, and it looks all right, except that you can't open the door because of the bollards. I would never be able to get my wheelchair out of that charging station. So again, it's an issue with regards to how they're going to deal with those things. Now, the next item I want to talk about is how do we get to universal design? What are the means by which we can change or adapt policy to make sure that charging stations and chargers are accessible and universal design? There are basically, I've identified a number of actors that can be important in this. The EV charging industry in the past, the EV charging industry has overlooked accessibility and universal design. And obviously, it doesn't have a business case similar to building charging stations in urban areas when we're talking about rural and remote underdeveloped areas. However, my experience in dealing with the charging industry, whether it be Flow or ChargePoint or Tesla, is that they simply do not have the awareness that it is necessary to design from a universal perspective. Once they're aware, they always agree that they have to change their design. There are standards institutions at the federal, provincial, national level. There is currently under the Accessible Canada Act project to make a number of issues, items accessible that are under federal jurisdiction, whether it's travel, whether it's built environment. They haven't got yet to the charging stations, and those standards will take about 5 years to develop. Even in BC, under the Accessible BC Act, they haven't started to develop principles of accessibility. So in the long run, it might be an idea to have those standards in, but by the time they are in 5 years, a lot of the infrastructure will have been built. So I would not say that this is the preferred way to change policy. The drivers and car dealers themselves are in a bit of a contrary situation. There's a huge demand for electric vehicles, and supply is the real problem. The Model Y is the most sold vehicle in the world right now. But at the same time, the dealers don't seem to have inventory. In many cases, people who go to buy electric vehicles are turned away in favor of internal combustion vehicles because there is no money to be made in after-sales service on electric vehicles. And therefore, you have a kind of a lack of enthusiasm in selling those. The government started, of course, its net zero programs a few years ago, and the recent development or assessment of that program are not very productive, not very positive. They were basically found by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development to not really address issues of remote and rural areas. So that will remain an issue to be clarified by NRCan. I will stop here. There's other issues of policy that you will probably have questions for, and I'll deal with them when the questions are up. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Mark Voda, and I'm also with the Prince George Electric Vehicle Association. Quickly, we'll talk today about my experience with long distance driving, my electric vehicle, and sort of how I came into the electric vehicle scene. So in 2019, this is around the time that Doug actually switched from his one Nissan Leaf to the other. I run a technology group here in Prince George, and one of the things we were looking at was getting a presentation on electric vehicles. There's a lot of technology in them. And so everyone pointed me to Doug. And at that time, I was actually a skeptic. I was anti-EV. I listened to all those news articles and everything that said they just don't work, whatever, and I believed it. So anyway, I had an open mind, and Doug kind of went through a slide deck and showed some statistics and data that a lot of the information that I was shown was actually not true. So I looked at it myself, and eventually I said, you know what? I like technology. Electric vehicles have technology. And in, I guess, 4 years ago, right, in 2020, end of January, I bought my Tesla Model 3 long range, and now it's been just over 4 years. I've driven over 120,000 kilometers since then, all over BC. Kind of see a map there in the bottom left showing I have an application I use called Tesla-Fi, which captures all the data, everything about where I drive and whatnot. It's a service that I subscribe to because I like looking at data and nerding out on that. And the longest drive I've done is 401 kilometers on a single charge from Prince George to Dawson Creek. It's like 4.5 hours to do that. And I still had 4% on my battery. Longest winter drive I've done is about 397 kilometers, Prince George to Smithers. And I've kind of done this, I guess that's like anything in life. By doing something, you gain experience and confidence. And so I've really pushed my vehicle to the limits in this. So about cold temperatures, the lowest temperature I've driven in, I think this is a bit outdated. I've been in the minus 40s a little bit, but long distance, definitely minus 30s. But the interesting thing is high temperature as well, plus 46. So we get quite a fluctuation here in temperatures in Prince George. So deep snow, winter conditions, that's a big question, is how do these electric vehicles fare in cold and wintry temperatures? I have a gasoline F-150 truck, and I have my electric Tesla Model 3. And what's interesting is it's come to the point in my household where my wife and daughter prefer to take the Tesla Model 3 over our 4x4 gas F-150. It's the traction is fantastic, the comfort, the nimbleness and everything. And we'll just show a few videos here. I do have a YouTube channel where I've kind of chronicled my experience over the last 4 years. I'll turn off the audio there and kind of fast forward here to a little section here where I'm driving down some back roads in the community that I live in. And let's see here. It's kind of dramatic at one point here where I get the camera out just to show how deep the snow is. And, when I was going through this drive in my community, the roads had not been plowed. It was like a couple feet of snow on the roads there, and you know, people were stuck on the roads and whatnot, and literally snow was billowing over the hood onto my car. And as long as you have good snow tires, electric vehicles offer really good traction in the wintertime because the weight distribution is on all four wheels. And, you know, like with your truck, you'll see a lot of people purchase sandbags, right? So they get that same kind of weight distribution. Well, you get that for free with an electric vehicle. So that's that first video. This next one shows something very interesting, and that is just this past winter, I visited a friend who lived on a very steep driveway on North the Chaco Road, for those who know that. And you'll just see in this video clip here, this is, I'm going to guess it's about a 60 or 70 foot incline. And it's 100% pure ice as I drive up this driveway, and it's raining out. We had a really strange couple weeks here, and the car just made it up no problem. You know, with the torque vectoring that you can get in an electric vehicle, you see the side shot here as I go up kind of shows the grade of what it is. And I'm sure a lot of people in Vancouver probably experienced something like that this winter, where you have those really steep inclines. You know, I'm not suggesting that EVs solve every problem, but, you know, I put mine to the test, and I was just really surprised at what kind of results I get in the cold, icy. So that kind of shows a little bit deep snow, icy conditions. A couple things here in the bullet points. You know, there's this feature with electric vehicles called regen, and that's like regeneration. And what happens is, and all EVs essentially provide this feature, when you take your foot off the acceleration pedal, the vehicle starts slowing down gradually to a stop on its own. And that can be a bit unnerving for a person that's not used to dealing with that, especially when the road is very icy, because your car can start to fishtail. So if you take your foot off the accelerator too quickly, you know, things can get scary for you. But I found I actually like that feature because I'm not very aggressive with how quickly I take my foot off. And it actually helps slow down without having to use the brakes, even on icy conditions. So anyways, just pointing that out. And let's move on to the next slide here. All right. All right, so long distance winter road trips. This is a list of a number of trips I've done over the 4 years. The last one is very interesting. So this past winter, we had a really cold snap here in Prince George. In January is about -30s, -35s, might have gotten to -40 overnight. I think the forecast said that. I never checked if it got that cold. But what happened was I said, you know what, I see this cold snap coming. I'm just going to drive from Prince George to McBride. I'm going to do that in a single charge, and I'm going to gather all the statistics. I'm going to document it. I made a video on this. And so I did that drive, and no problem. I went from Prince George to McBride, single charge. I think it was 20-something% charge left over. Just drove a normal drive, had my son in there. Car was nice and warm. I had the heater on. And it just kind of to show what can an electric car do in these extreme temperatures. Yes, you lose a certain amount of range. We'll talk about that on another slide where I have a graph showing temperature graph and efficiencies and whatnot. But just to say, electric vehicles work very well in cold temperatures. To point out that same week, all of my gasoline vehicles here in town, mine and those of my children that live downtown and whatnot, none of them would start. My F-150 has a brand new 12-volt battery, would not start. And of course, it's because gasoline vehicles require that starter motor, takes a lot of draw, and batteries have a hard time in extreme cold when you have to have lots of draw. So anyways, just pointing out that even electric vehicle or non-electric vehicles, they have to plug in too, just like EVs in the winter, in order to maintain functionality. Anyways, so you can see here, I've been from Prince George to Tumbler Ridge. So in the winter, I've been to Prince Rupert. I've been to Alberta through the Icefields Highway in cold winter, even when the highway's been closed because of fatality at Mount Robson. You know, people talk about that in the news. Not a problem. Didn't take much energy. Just watched Netflix while I waited for 6 hours for the highway to open. Driven to Vancouver, Kamloops, etc. So this graph here shows real data collected for my vehicle over 4 years, and the efficiency, the higher the percentage, that means you're more efficient in different temperatures. So Whereas right here, this would be 0 degrees to 5 degrees, and then getting colder on this side, getting warmer on this side. How efficient is your vehicle? So you can see down here at -30, -25, -30, you start losing a percentage of your range, and you just factor that in. My particular vehicle, when I bought it new, had a range of like 520 kilometers. I think today it's about 480 kilometers would be my maximum. If I cut that in half, how far can a person get in 240 kilometers in winter? Pretty far. Anyways, that's just kind of showing real world what you can expect in cold temperatures, and really just managing expectations. Do you need to drive for more than 2.5 hours when it's -30 out without stopping anywhere? That's a question you have to ask yourself. I think most people, the answer is probably no. So what's the current state of charging in northern BC? So as of February 2024, EVs with a range of 200 kilometers or more, in my experience, can reliably travel east, west, south, no problem. Driving north of the city of Prince George is still problematic to this date. I've done it. Of course, I've been to Dawson Creek. I've been to Tumbler Ridge in winter, but it's going to take more time. The infrastructure is very weak at this point in time. Although I did notice this year, BC Hydro and Ministry of Transportation have announced, I don't know, like something like 5 or 6 significant areas where they're going to have new chargers. So that will change. And this has been changing every year. Education is key. We've seen a lot of news organizations talking about Chicago, New York, and Tesla charger problems with people in very cold temperatures. And we're not getting the full story from those news articles. Education is very important. A lot of the problems people experience within electric vehicles because they simply don't know what the right way or the best way to operate is. Another thing is, I think others have talked about this, preconditioning your battery. When you're going to a charging station on a long road trip, you need to tell your vehicle that you're going there so that your vehicle can start warming up your battery when it's really cold out. You're going to get the best charging experience. For example, make backup plans. I mean, some of these things, like making a backup plan, is not specific to EVs, but especially if you're going in areas where the infrastructure isn't mature, make backup plans. You know, if you go somewhere and a charging station is out and it's the only charging station that's there, or if you get to a place where there's a highway accident or whatever, because there are less options today than with gasoline, make backup plans, figure out what an alternative would be if something happens. And I just mentioned in brackets there, you know, you can charge at an RV site, and RV sites are all over the place. That's one example. Charging at home is fabulous. And as other people have said, if you can charge at home, electric vehicles are a slam dunk. There's just really no reason why a person with a passenger vehicle today shouldn't consider going with an EV. Wintertime, summertime, fabulous. I've saved over $13,000 in the 4 years that I've driven my vehicle around Canada here, and no regrets whatsoever. And then power outages. They're a minimal concern in that, can you drive your EV if the power goes out? What happens if the power goes out? Well, my car, and I've done this test before, I actually had my car rented out on that platform called Turo for a while. And I've seen where some of the customers that used it, they just wouldn't charge for the whole week. I had a doctor from Calgary who would come to town and he would rent out the car and it would just sit there for a whole week and he wouldn't charge it. And, you know, even in cold temperatures, you're going to lose, if it's extremely cold, maybe 5 or 6% today if it's just sitting there doing nothing. But in regular operation, you might lose 1% a day. So like, you know, you're going to be able to sit there for weeks is the truth. And so that's really all I had, sort of just scratching the surface. So much we could cover, but that's all I had for today. Thanks.
Thank you hugely to all of our speakers. There's some, as I mentioned earlier, there's some really great knowledge here. There's some really good comments in the chat. We had mentioned at the beginning that we aren't able to monitor the chat for questions, that we would like you to put your questions in the Q&A. But I would just like to refer people to the chat for some really interesting discussion there about northern driving and other things. I'm going to moderate this this chat and direct some of the questions that are in there. So when I do that, I'm going to direct the question. I'll mute myself, and then I'll ask the panelists that I'm addressing to unmute themselves and start their video, and then remute when they're done the question. So one of the things that I'm going to start out with a question of my own. Just really briefly wanted to do a redirect to Doug to Mark to your last presentation. If you could just give people an idea of the distance between McBride and Prince George when you talked about that, because there are people here who may not be familiar with that, and whether there were charging options for you between Prince George and McBride if you had needed those. So if you can just speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, so the drive between Prince George and McBride is about 220 kilometers one way. As it stands today, there's, I think about halfway, there's a rest area that has 2 25 kilowatt chargers and a few level 2 chargers. But that day, the ministry had an outage because BC Hydro was doing electrical repair. So I had no options for that drive. But normally there would be that as an option.
Okay, and if I can just keep you on for a sec, I'll start with there's a question in the Q&A that I'll start with you, and then I'll maybe get some feedback from others as well. One of the things that we've talked about, you, me, Mark, and the other folks along the way, is that some of these chargers are not like that, few and far between, and when you get there, there's very limited options, and they aren't always operational. So there's a question in the Q&A, how do we encourage regular monitoring and servicing for DC fast chargers in the north? Fort St. John to Prince George can be challenging with only a few 22 kilowatt chargers in place, and often they're not reliable. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And again, I've done those trips. I've been up to Chetwynd, up to Dawson, and to Tumbler Ridge. And to be honest, at times where the chargers were, let me say this to start off with. And again, we didn't have lots of time to get in details, but using an app like PlugShare, to me, if you are an EV driver and you're not using PlugShare, you've got a problem. PlugShare is a crowdsourced application that shows reliability over time and comments from people who are charging at charging stations. Okay, there's no better place than there. And so what I did when I did those trips, I would look at PlugShare and I'd see, okay, last week, you know, these 3 different EV drivers had no problem there, whatever. Plus, Ministry of Transport, BC Hydro, they often put comments there or status changes there showing you there's going to be an outage during this period of time. So to me, that's critical, especially when infrastructures may be weak. So that's number 1. Number 2, I talked about the backup plan. So I've got a number of adapters for my electric vehicle. I've also, like, one of the big trips I've done, so the one you talked about is small potatoes to me. Going up to Fort St. John, that's nothing. I've been 3,400 kilometers over to northern Manitoba, where there's no hope of infrastructure anywhere. Like, these are provinces that don't even care about putting infrastructure in, right? They're taxing you yearly to have an EV. And so to plan in extreme conditions like that, you got to do some work. I called ahead. I looked at RV sites and different places like that. Like, if I have a problem between this spot and this spot, what would I do? You know, usually I would look at anywhere there's electricity technically. Worst case scenario, if you're running out, go to a house, and if you have an adapter, can I plug into your dryer outlet for a few hours or something, right? Worst case scenario. So I plan that way. I know it sounds crazy, but that's where we're at in rural areas where there's no infrastructure. You still have options. And by the way, just to wrap that up, PlugShare, personal homeowners put their houses on there saying, if you need charging, you can come here. And when I did my first trip to Dawson Creek, there was a guy who was about 50 kilometers before there who had his house on there. And I contacted him to confirm, if I need it, could I stop there? right? So there's things you can do. Everyone has electricity. There's houses everywhere.
Great. Thanks, Mark. I'm just going to ask you to mute. Thank you. And I'm going to get a different perspective on this, maybe from Jacques. Jacques, you've done a lot of driving, but have sort of some other requirements. What has been your experience? And if you can, I know you've been through the US to Canada, pretty lengthy drives. So a little bit of that, but also this is about Canada. So if you've got any experiences there.
So, yeah, I'm unmuted now. That's okay. So my experience is quite different because I didn't do northern driving all that much, but I did do 2 circumnavigations of North America all the way to the east coast down to Florida and across. On the major highways, there's never a problem. There's charges most everywhere. I only had to change my route once in Texas because there were no charges where I was going. But for all the rest of my drives, I've had no difficulty. That's no difficulty finding charging stations. However, I think I found one in my entire trip around North America that was accessible for wheelchair users. So I had to wait for 2 people to move away from my spot in order for me to plug in. Or at one time, I had to wait 20 minutes for somebody else to show up because somebody had parked so close to my car, I could not get into the car. And as you know, once it's plugged in, it's not functional. So you have to basically find a way to get into the car to move it away. So, like I said, on main roads, no issue for finding charging stations. On the topic of accessibility, not so good.
Thanks, Jacques. There was one other question that's come to mind. If you could just briefly talk about, we've had this conversation that accessible charging solutions don't need to be expensive. So.
Yeah, so basically, in a lot of cases, making a charger accessible or even universal design is very simple. And when I've spoken to people from, like I said, ChargePoint, Flow, and Tesla, they agree that with a minimal amount of changes, every charger can become accessible. It's a question of awareness. It's not really a question of cost. I know that when I spoke to people in Tesla, they were, first of all, surprised to hear that there were accessibility issues. It was the same reaction with BC Hydro, with Fortis BC. Once the shock has worn off and they realize that they have not improved the charging stations, doing so is not expensive at all. The only issue so far that I found that has not been resolved is the cable management system. But other than that, it's just a solution, a simple solution to make things accessible.
I'm going to ask Clay if you can comment on Lee Reed's question on the OCPP.
Sure. So the question is, can you comment on the possibility of OCPP, and that is Open Charge Point Protocol controlled home chargers will be turned off in a grid shortage situation rather than just being downrated. Concern is that the system doesn't know what an individual's emergency transportation requirement might be, not selfishness. So any of the demonstrations of demand response that I've seen are opt-in, opt-out. So usually you get a notification ahead of time from a utility that there's a shortage, and it can be pushed out as a tariff change. So let's say there's a high, medium, and low tariff, and ordinarily you operate in a low tariff. Then you're in control of what happens when the utility transitions into a medium tariff or a high tariff. So the automated response might be that a charger would throttle down to say 50% of its charge rate in the event of a medium tariff, and you might have it set to turn off completely in a high tariff, but it's up to you, and you can opt out. So there's it would be very, very unpopular for a utility to have a very heavy-handed approach where they directly control your charger without any kind of opt-in, opt-out, because the utilities recognize that sometimes people are in situations where they need their transportation. They have to have it. It's not an option. They may be emergency workers or other frontline workers that have to get there. So you can almost always opt out of any kind of demand response.
Great. So thanks, Clay. Doug, I wanted to shoot a question to you that isn't actually in the Q&A, but one of the things that we had talked about and didn't really get a chance to discuss was the access to service and sort of dealer support in your experience around Prince George and northern areas where you travel for EVs. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, any electrician can work on an electric car, in the sense that we had a mechanics instructor from a high school, and their students do the conversion. So that's the level of technology that's and knowledge that's needed to maintain electric. So it's not like you're dealing with NASA spaceships technology, but it's nice to be able to go to garages and have it serviced easily, mainstream, like we do with our gas and diesel vehicles. And a lot of the car dealerships, they need to be electric certified in order to do the warranty work on the vehicles that they or their other sister dealerships sell. And so it has been slow and difficult. People are having to go to Kelowna, Vancouver, to Calgary to get servicing. It is getting better. The province has got 4 or 5 colleges doing electric vehicle mechanics training courses for Red Seal mechanics. I think it might even be BCIT's doing a year-long, once a month in-person training, plus modules that are done electronically in between. We have a couple of dealerships or independent service stations in Prince George that have mechanics going through that intensive training. And so not too long from now, everywhere will be able to easily have mainstream servicing, including warranty work of your vehicles. But that's part of the growing pain of an early adopter.
Thanks, Doug. That leads into another question from the Q&A, which is an interesting one. And I'll probably do I'll come back to Doug and Mark on this one. Do people think EV charging infrastructure in northern communities is an equity issue? If folks in remote northern communities have less access to chargers or infrastructure, what will happen if some northerners get left behind in the ICE to EV transition? So I'll go back to you, Doug, if you can maybe just briefly address that, and then I'll pop over to Mark for his thoughts.
Maybe you can go to Mark.
Sure. So yeah, that's an interesting question. And actually, I should say I never buy new vehicles. I'm that guy. Like, why would anyone buy a new vehicle? You're paying tons of money. You know, I looked at the used market 4 years ago for an EV. That's where I started. Problem at the time was there wasn't anything. That has changed significantly. There's quite a few more options out there. And so if we're talking about affordability, just like any other vehicle, gasoline, look at the used market. And I think you guys had some points on that in the presentation earlier about what to look for. It's important to know what to look for, but there's a lot more affordable options for used EVs now. Like, you know, Doug talked about his Nissan Leaf, even a lot of Teslas out there. The #1 selling vendor right now there's a lot of those vehicles in the market.
Thanks, Mark. I'm gonna just shoot this same question over to Jacques to get his insights.
Yeah, interestingly about the issue of equity with regards to northerners who might get left behind in that transition. Obviously, the transition applies to everyone, whatever your status, wherever you live, and therefore it's a real issue of equity. That was raised specifically in the report issued in November last year by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development to the Parliament of Canada. And in that report, it says that Natural Resources Canada should clearly define underserved areas, establish specific targets, and use a more strategic approach with criteria that prioritize electric vehicle charging projects across Canada in areas where others may not invest in charging infrastructure or where there are significant gaps in coverage. This approach could help to ensure that all areas across Canada would benefit from the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program's funding. It also said that the NRCan should assess or adjust the program so that future funded public electric vehicle charging ports provide users with an increased level of convenience and confidence in the reliability of the program-funded charging stations. So that issue is squarely now raised before the Parliament of Canada with regards to NRCan's programs.
Thanks, Jacques. Do you have any? So this is kind of related, but not really. There's another question here, and I'm going to shoot this to Mark and Doug because we've had some discussions about this as well. So the question is, how do we get the insurance industry and an expensive supply chain slow response to stop writing off a damaged EV for lack of affordable parts?
Yep, I think
a battery costing as much as a new car.
Yeah, there's two parts to that. Number one, like all information.
Mark, you're muted.
Am I muted?
I hear you, Mark.
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay. All right. So anyway, just to say there's two parts to that. Number one is information, whether it's accurate or not. And what I mean by that is we hear all the stories that are the sensational stories, but we don't hear all the, person had a problem and everything was replaced just fine under insurance and whatnot. I'm not saying that there aren't problems out there, but we certainly hear more about the more extreme stories. And, our members here in Prince George have been a number of service items that have happened. And the biggest issue is getting the vehicle there. But all in all, we have not heard those stories from our members and around here. They'd make the news headlines when it's a battery that's $60,000 and whatever. But honestly, so the online community, we see real world what's happening. And for Tesla, typically in Canada, if you had to pay out of your own pocket for a brand new battery, it's typically like $12,000 or something like that, $12,000 to $16,000, depending on the size of your battery. But when it comes to insurance and costs for that, it really, from my experience, it comes down to where's the market of people that are willing to work on these electric vehicles. I'll give an example. I have real world right here. Someone backed into my Tesla Model 3. I live here in northern BC. There's the closest service center is like Vancouver or Edmonton, all like 700 to 800 kilometers away. So going through that process, the cost of the hood itself was like $1,500. Not too bad. The cost of getting a body shop to take the other hood off, paint this hood and put it on was like $2,000 an hour. It was under $4,000 all said and done for replacing a hood. Not too much different from any other vehicle. But there's problems in all of that because we don't have lots of body shops trained and willing to work on it. Even willing Windshields, who's willing to, oh, we don't work on electric. That's something we don't really know, or not high enough volume that they would be interested in. So that's definitely part of the insurance problem. Because now, if someone needs work done here and there's only a few shops willing to work on it, there's a big queue, or, you know, there's all these problems, costs go up. So this is definitely part of the issue.
Okay, all of these things sort of tying, together with the sort of the different expectations between North and the more, can I say, privileged South, and all sort of answering whether or not there is a kind of an inequity. It's interesting, and lots more conversation can be had around all of this. I'm going to pass over for a couple of questions to my colleague Clay Howie.
So one question is from Greg Dueck. Please comment on educating government and individuals on EV charging versus block heater warming in power shortages like in Alberta this winter. I'm not exactly sure the question, but I will comment on what I know. So I've lived in Alberta and Edmonton in the wintertime, and I certainly needed a block heater for my ICE vehicle at the time, or it simply wouldn't start in the morning when there was a cold snap. Block heaters tend to draw less, so we're talking about 120 volt, 15 amp maximum. If you're EV charging on a level 1, you're drawing about the same, but most people are charging on level 2, so there's a bigger draw, 240 volt, usually 32 amp. But EVs have got a bigger level of control, so most cars have got a timer that you can set on when you're going to be charging. You've got most of the EVs sold today have got about a 400 kilometer range. So even in the worst scenario in the wintertime, if your range is cut in half, according to Stats Canada, most people's typical commute is about 9 kilometers one way. So call it 16 to 18 kilometers for a typical commuter. It can be higher in the north, but the point is that you don't necessarily have to charge every day. So you've got a bit of wiggle room there. Also, there's technologies coming like demand response where the utilities could have a level of control if you allow them on when you're going to be charging, so that you're not going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak. And there's also technologies like V2G and V2H where you can actually use your electric vehicle to help power your home. There's another question from Corey Timmons. Aside from hydro and nuclear, renewable energy generation suffers from being an intermittent source of energy. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. Are we risking increasing the carbon intensity of the Canadian electric grid in order to meet EV initiatives? Actually, I'd like to share my screen a little bit just to show a project. Oh, bear with me a sec. Bring up the right page here. Okay, can everybody see my screen? So this is a project that we did here at BCIT, the Energy Oasis. So Oasis is an acronym for Open Access to Sustainable Intermittent Systems. And it is a system that has got a large solar canopy. That's a 250 kilowatt photovoltaic canopy and 500 kilowatt hours of lithium ion battery storage. So this is an indirect answer to your question about how to address the intermittent sources of renewable energy. And the main loads on this system are a couple of DC fast chargers and 10 level 2 chargers. So I'm just going to stop sharing here. So there are solutions to address this, and also most of the studies say that even in jurisdictions that have got a fairly high carbon energy mix, there's still savings in emissions from switching over to electric vehicles because ICE cars are so very wasteful of energy. Most of the energy from the gasoline burning goes out the tailpipe and is lost as heat rather than actually propelling your car forward. Okay, stop the video.
Hey, thanks, Clay. So I would like to direct this question to Jacques first, Clay, and then Mark. It's a bit more, I'll ask for a bit more general answer coming from your own expertise, but the question is asking about charging stations and payment. So payment is something that we at BCIT have been working on for some time. The question is, they have two charging stations. One is a Tesla, the other IV. The IV requires an app. Why not make it so we can use a debit card? Or we've heard a lot, why can't we just use debit cards and credit cards everywhere? Not everyone has access to the apps. And you know, I'm shooting it to Jack to give a first.
Yeah. If you recall my universal design principles, one of them is that it be accessible to all. And obviously, if you're going to have to carry a variety of credit cards in order to access the different chargers, that's not going to make it easy for everyone. For the Tesla, it's easy because if you use a Tesla charger, you just plug it in and it's, I guess, charged to your credit card automatically. I've used other chargers than Tesla, and I've struggled trying to get because the one place that I was using it, for example, was in the basement of a condo, and there was no reception there for me to actually turn on the app on my phone. So I had to run outside, get the app, run back in to see if I could use it, and that was very frustrating. So I see where you're coming from on this. I believe that there is now a move afoot, if you want, to simplify this and make it all under one payment system. I'm not aware of how this works. I'm not technically on this one, so I'll have to leave it to somebody else. I don't know, Claire, if you're able to deal with that part. Sure.
So the issue that we're talking about here is they call it in the industry roaming, and there's an open protocol for it called OCPI, Open Charge Point Interface, and that allows different vendors to sort of move money around, and so that the process of charging is transparent. You know, I've been an EV driver since about 2014, and you know, back then you needed a separate card for every different vendor out there, and that's still true to a certain extent, but there is change coming. There has to be appetite from the big vendors. So Flow has to be willing to communicate with ChargePoint and do those transactions. We have done some demonstrations here at BCIT using OCPI to demonstrate roaming, but there is appetite for it with some vendors, but not all. Well, some vendors want to keep everything in-house and don't want to play ball with others. But we do envision a future where roaming is ubiquitous. The new standard for open charging, OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol, version 2.01, has got some support for making tariffs a lot more transparent to users at the station and so on. And we're hoping that roaming becomes ubiquitous with virtually every vendor out there. But something that we here at BCIT don't have a lot of control over. We're trying to push as much as we can.
Okay, I'm just going to switch back to Jacques, and then I'll pass it over to Mark to talk about this issue in the north, which is kind of paired with concerns around access to data as well. But Jacques,
Yes, I was just going to add that I read recently that with the rollout of the North American charging standard almost across the board to all the manufacturers in the next couple of years, one issue was whether or not, if you had a Ford, for example, would you still require an app, even though you're charging on the Tesla network? And the answer from Ford was no. They're making it so that when you plug in on the Tesla network, you will not need an app. It will just plug in and everything will be resolved transparently. So this may be the answer coming to a lot of car manufacturers in the next few years.
okay, great, thanks. So Tesla helping to sort of lead the way. Mark, do you have any comments you'd like to add here?
Absolutely. So I'll talk a bit about today and then the future. I think Jacques really brought up a good point, is that NACS standard, which is there's two things here. There's how I charge and make payment at the charger, and then there's what plugs do I use, like even standardizing on how to charge a car and how to pay for that charge. Those are two things that have been problematic, to say the least, over these years, but those have all started to converge. And so today, I kind of show here, this is my BC Hydro RFID card. Why do I have this card? I have a phone, I'm a technology guy, etc. And that's just knowledge of where you're going. I've been through the experience to say some places, even if they say there's a cell signal, when you get there, there may not. Maybe your phone's not working. Maybe their back-end servers have crashed and you can't communicate with it. So this card allows me to charge in a lot of these areas where there can be all these problems. And it's like a credit card. And BC Hydro has kind of agreements with a bunch of networks using like that flow standard. So I can charge it not just BC Hydro, but a number of others with this card. And from what I understand, some of these machines, they will download accounts they know about to the machine, so that if they don't have connectivity, they kind of know a bit about, okay, you swipe your card, you can charge here, whatever. There's some of that going on from what I understand. So there's today, yeah, you have all these cards, but from my experience as well today, many of these stations allow you, if you don't have an account, if you don't have an app, a lot of them will let you swipe your credit card on there. They may not even say it, but some of these places will just do that and they'll charge your credit card. So that does exist in a lot of these places. That's today. In the future, and we're seeing companies already starting to do this, you're going to have vendors who say, like this BC Hydro card, hey, if you use our card, you can use it anywhere and we'll take care of the fact that, it's not our network, it's somebody else's. We'll take care of it in the back end for us. And so innovation is already out there where companies are going to make it as a service where, hey, if you use our stuff, you can charge anywhere. And definitely with these standards coming out of this adapter, the Tesla plug being a North American standard where all manufacturers will charge that way, along with how that communicates in the back end, it's going to make it easier. But like I said, some companies today are already saying you can charge in all these different charging stations if you use our card or our app or whatever. So definitely be prepared when you're in the north. It's probably a good idea to get these RFID cards from the places you're going to charge, because they will work when the cell signal doesn't.
Great. This is your video. So I think we're pretty much out of the questions in the Q&A. What I'd like to do is go around to each one of our panelists, and maybe within 2 minutes, 200 words, just any final comments or thoughts on EVs and in Northern and rural Canada, challenges, misconceptions, and lessons learned. So I'll start with you, Clay.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks everyone for your time and for attending. Just a final note on, one of the questions that was raised in the Q&A is about regular monitoring and servicing for DC fast chargers in the far north. Certainly, we're very sympathetic to that situation, and one that it may not be obvious is to contact your MP or MLA. Some of this is a political issue. Some of the chargers that are installed were installed with money from Natural Resources Canada, and some of those owners are obligated to keep a fast charger operational. It can be really challenging. At BCIT, we've had 4 different DC fast chargers over the years, and it can be difficult. The vendors can stop making the chargers. Our first generation were Schneider Electric ones that they stopped. They got out of the business. AeroVironment was a big player early on in the game. They're gone. We have 1 DC fast charger down at the moment, and we're having a very difficult time getting replacement parts from the original vendor. So it's important to raise this from a political level, because a lot of the funding comes from either the federal government or the provincial government at this time. If it's Petrogan, that's a different story. But if it's if it's a BC Hydro station, you can call BC Hydro to let them know. Sometimes like I said, it's an issue that they can't resolve, but it is something that a political help may help resolve the situation.
Yes, I totally agree, Clay, that the political line is often the only one that's available. As I mentioned, the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development already made comments on the fact that the Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program did not seem to provide adequately for under-resourced areas. I had written a letter in October of last year to NRCan dealing with accessibility issues, and I said, considering that the federal government is heavily subsidizing the birth of this new infrastructure, should the funding not require that charging stations be accessible in line with applicable federal accessibility standards? And the answer I got in November was that basically, unfortunately, accessibility in terms of access to the physical infrastructure is not within federal jurisdiction and outside the scope of ZEVIP.
From my perspective, and I think a lot of us can relate to this, I hate having to maintain my gasoline vehicle. I hate it breaking down, my starting motor, my radiator's leaking, my gas tank is leaking. There's so many things that I have to maintain with that. And many years it's been like that. And so one of the things that was the promise that, from the literature I read, is EVs have a lot less maintenance. Well, in 4 years and 120,000 kilometers, that's been my case. I changed the tires, and if you have to get major repairs, I guess any type of vehicle is going to have problems. But in the 4 years that I've had this driven all over the place, it's been a real pleasant experience. Whether it's freezing cold out, going on long trips, saving piles of money, and not having to worry about so much maintenance like I did with it. I now feel like gasoline vehicles are like these products that have to be babied all the time. So anyway, it's just something to throw out there that it's been a real treat.
And Doug, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, the energy transition that we're going through right now, I think it's as quick and exciting as the technological transition that we went through from about 1880, about 1920, when you got your automated washing machine and the telephone and all sorts of other amazing technologies. Airplanes were not much after that, and it's exciting. So my EV, that they all sit outside in the driveway, no special treatment. The grid, I think if we adopted VDG, vehicle to grid technologies, at least for fleet vehicles and larger industrial vehicles, the expense of operating the grid will be less, and a lot of the concerns people have about the grid will disappear. I'm a big advocate for that because I'd rather see one battery drive my vehicle, and when it's not driving my vehicle, it's helping the grid and making me money. People talk about the increase in carbon-based fuels that might be related to increased electrical production. Well, EVs on coal-generated electricity still produce about half the greenhouse gas emissions of gas and diesel vehicles. So it's still an improvement. It's not as good as if it's clean electricity, but it's still an improvement. The cost savings of electric technology is just phenomenal. So go for it and have fun.
All right, we're down to the last 5 minutes, and I really just wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to Doug, to Mark for taking the time to work with us to put this stuff together and to make these presentations, to Jacques for his ongoing work with us, and to my colleague Clay Howie, and last but not least, our support team of Antoinette Jackson, who managed to pull a rabbit out of her hat with getting us all set up on a Zoom webinar thing, which is not something that we have used before. Janet So, who's doing some technical support, and Alan Stewart and Aaron Finnerty, who are being our test attendees and helping us to report any issues. So thank you to everyone. And of course, not least to everyone who attended and took the time to ask questions, to attend the webinar and to ask questions. We really appreciate your interest. And as I've said, we'll be getting the recording up probably on YouTube, and other information will be sent out to everyone in the next week or so. So thank you, and I will end the webinar now.